My consciousness will be crushed by the weight of memoria, and then get reconstructed in a peculiar manner. This is the only way for me to enter the land of dreams. However, death doesn't frighten me. I've grown used to it. Firefly, on going into the Peanut Honey Dreamscape. Firefly, a character from Honkai Star Rail, is incredible. The story and the character are both very enthralling to me because of how fundamentally human it is, whilst managing to bring up some pretty heavy stuff in the narrative, indirectly at least, about dealing with her seemingly inevitable death and the death of her identity, yet still staying jovial in tone. Yet many people seem determined to ignore how interesting Firefly is and that kind of deeper story, which is a shame to me because the humanity that her story embodies is what I find most interesting about stories in general. It leads to characters that truly embed themselves in your mind and ones that become unforgettable artistic representations of life, both its beauties and its problems. In this video, I'm going to be mainly focusing on her role in the narrative and how I think she's just really cool, but I do have a lot to say about, I think, the community response to her, and especially the ship between her and Trailblazer. So I hope you enjoy. I think it's pretty good. Well, at least what I wrote is. I don't know about what I've said, because I don't speak good sometimes. But I hope it's good. Firefly was originally created to be part of an army, Gomorph Cavalry, who were, or maybe still are, fighting off the Swarm, a potentially universe-destroying bug army. Oh my god, it's Starship Trooper. It's a space opera trope. Not sure if that terminology's right, but we'll go with it. Then she's got Sam, the mech armor that not only provides her with generations, but keeps her disease called entropy loss syndrome from progressing. This disease would cause her to disappear into nothingness, and it would be as if she never existed at all. Which, you know, it's like the only thing that would be left would be the mech armor. That's really sad, if that's the only thing that would be left of her. Like, her only legacy would be violence, and the thing everyone else saw, rather than herself and how she wanted to present herself. So it's kind of like the death of identity. Ooh, it's kind of the theme of the video.
Sorry, just to do a quick note here. I believed that entropy loss syndrome definitely led to a person's body physically disappearing. This might not be true for a lot of reasons. One of them is that it has a striking resemblance to like the symptoms of it do to ALS, which damages the connections between your nerves, and you essentially lose control of your body over time and eventually die from it, which is really horrible. And that's obviously a real condition, so it might just be like the space version of that. I believed that it was definitely a physical disappearance because of how Firefly describes it, which is irreversible chronic disassociation of a person's physical structure. That could also describe ALS. Her Eidolon 6 implies a physical disappearance, though, so I still think that disappearance would happen, but you could make a fair argument that that's not literal. Even if it's not literal, the Sam suit is still kind of representative of her pain and suffering, as I'll go into this more video, as it literally worsens the pain of ELS whilst like limiting the symptoms. Basically, I just didn't realise how not clear-cut this physical disappearance thing was, and there's competing information on it. So yeah, sorry about that.
And all of this fits within themes of Honkai Star Rail. I'm going to say themes rather than theme, even though it is technically a theme surrounding death, both in a universe-wide sense with aeons, which are like gods. For example, the nihility, which is just a massive black hole. And, what do black holes do? They basically just consume matter, and will consume until there's nothing left to consume, or they themselves are slowly withered away into nothingness. And, it also comes in another form of, societal, right? Like a societal representation of death, which is Belobog, which is slowly decaying whilst it's been cut off from the universe. And it's preserving itself, it's following the path of preservation, but it's just getting, just over time, shrinking down until the asteroids crash up and save the day, and there's a chance for that society to regrow. Or the Lofu with the disciples of Santicus Medicus, who basically become zombies of abundance, which is like a healing god, so they are alive, but they aren't people anymore. They've lost their humanity. So, that's kind of dark, right? It's people dying, it's different types of death, and it's exploring that through, how we think about death. It's about that, right? But this doesn't actually have that overwhelming presence on the game that you would think it would. Thanks to the kind of silly and jovial tone, for the most part, which I think the main cast, and especially the protagonists, do a really good job of bringing it in and kind of subtly hiding for the kind of average person this very obvious, I don't even know if it's a metaphor, that's how obvious it is if you think about it. But I think the silly tone does a really good job of masking it, and it's really appealing in a way. But there are exceptions to that tone, like on Amphorius you've got Phynon, who goes through death on a personal human level in many, many ways. Obviously he's kind of like the Grim Reaper in some ways, but he's also, it's like grief, it's suffering the same thing over and over again in a cycle, in your mind, but obviously in reality for Phynon. So it's another metaphor for death, but this time on a personal level. And Firefly, the subject of this video, is much closer to that personal death aspect rather than the other ones, the societal or the kind of universe destroying of the nihility. Right? It's different from. It's more like that, more like that experience of finals. From that quote in the beginning that I read out, you can tell that she doesn't fear death. She says as much, right? But she's constantly on the precipice of it. Instead, I do think she just fears something else, because the whole motivator is curing her disease and trying to live. And so those statements, that statement and that goal seem to clash. And I think the reason for that is because she's afraid of the death of her identity. Or perhaps not even being able to develop an identity. She's afraid of not getting that opportunity, right? And you can, see that in the skin they released, what she wants is to be able to be, go to school and get, knowledge and become a person, right? What do you learn while you're at school? Yes, you learn, maths, right? But you also learn how to become a person. That's kind of the most important thing about school that they don't tell you. And that's what she wants. She kind of doesn't know how to be a person, and she wants to be a person. And that's really cool, and it's a cute skin, and look at her smile on her face, she's very happy. Nice. In this pit of misery. If you think about that death of identity concept, think about entropy loss syndrome. It's disappearing from the world, leaving nothing behind, as if she didn't matter, right? She was a member of an army, right, that had accelerated growth, and they were going to battle and piloting these suits of armor. That was what she was designed for, to fight this universal threat. She was a weapon. She even says so herself. She was never meant to matter to anyone on an individual level, or mean anything to anyone. She was a piece on a chessboard, right? But to ponder questions of your own meaning and other people's meaning, and believing yourself to matter, that is fundamentally human. That is what we are. It's what we do. It's what we've always done as people. Every person has had thoughts about themselves and the world and their existence. And she specifically asked in her character story section, why do we die? Why do we live? And she speaks of this as her awakening when she had those things during the battle between Glamoth and the Swarm that she was in. And she's referring to herself and the cavalry. And it's just like, that is fundamentally something you can't take from someone, even like a person created artificially. To ask those questions and genuinely want answers to them is intrinsically a human thing. Nothing else does that. You can't take that from people either. Firefly describes Sam, her mech suit, as
Sam, Iron Cavalry of the Firmament Frontline, Firefly Type 4 Strategic Assault Mecha. To others, it's a weapon for opposing the swarm. But really, it's just me. I know Sam is the cradle of my vitality and the meaning of my existence. But I hope it isn't all of me.
So Sam, this identity or persona, it contrasts with everything about Firefly, and she clearly does not want to be solely defined by it. Firefly tells Trailblazer when they first meet, in Pinocchio Dreamscape, that outside of it, she's terminally ill. She's got obviously entry loss syndrome, right? And that she's weak and wants to be free of her disease. Yet Sam, this powerful weapon, who's identified as a man by everybody, and is like this major like universal criminal, right? It's like, how can a weak person be like a major criminal and be like in this big powerful suit? And it's the dichotomy between like a weak woman and a strong man. It's like a persona. They're different things, but they're the same person. Whoa. And this works really well. And when you first meet Firefly, because when she first appears in the Dreamscape, there's like little hints. And you don't know she's Sam yet, but she knows more. There's more going on there, and she's kind of poorly hiding these parts of her personality, and that she's more than this kind of fantasy of a woman. How she kind of presents herself to some extent, that just like needs saving, like she's a damsel in distress. And she even has this tropey kind of, at face value, a bit misogynistic death, where death. It's just, you can't die in the Dreamscape, but too complicated to explain right now. Where she dies, and she's crying as she dies, and she isn't able to save herself, it seems, right? So it's like she's a damsel that's not been saved, and it's the end of the quest, it's the ending of the quest, it's a cliffhanger, but also it's like the trope of a woman dying because of shock value. Well, I hope they do something interesting with that in the next patch. And then they did. Next thing that happens chronologically is Sam appears, and then goes toe-to-toe with Acheron, who's this really powerful person, an animator of nihility, which is just scary, and she keeps appearing in random places. She's lost. And then it starts, and then the quest starts up a bit. It's revealed that Sam is Firefly, and it's the Samus twist, but with more meaning into it. It's like an actual deconstruction of tropes, but there's more to it. Cool. And thematically, right, it's like that simpler Firefly that we saw, who she was trying to be, at least, did die. Like her identity died, and then to the player, to the Trailblazer, it was reborn. And you saw because you saw the reality of her circumstances, and your perception was remade of her. Died and then remade, which is pretty cool. In this first quest, you obviously see how she wants to be, or she's trying to act how she wants to be, but she can't hide from herself how she is and has to be, so bits slip through, as I said before. And she's acting like this trope because she's not used to being able to express herself as a woman, or however she wants to, right? So of course she's acting like that. Of course she dies in a simply tropey way, because she doesn't know how to express herself in other ways because she's never had the opportunity. It is the death of her personal expression. And it speaks to the kind of nature of her relationship with Sam as well, with the suit, because it's her restrictive existence that prompted this situation, right? And really tragic because she can never have a personal experience that's free of her burdens, and she can never present that to someone else, even though it seemed like she got that opportunity with Trailblazer, who knew her at some point in the past and has, for plot reasons, forgotten. And she got a chance to introduce herself again, and so she did in a way that was free of her burdens, but then because of the circumstances she's under, completely gone. She, you're completely faced with she can't present herself how she wants to. You have to have this like blast of horrible reality, and that's just really sad. So it recontextualizes all this stuff of like kind of tropey, misogynistic, adjacent, right? Not necessarily fully misogynistic, necessarily an intent or whatever, stuff into a kind of a tragedy of someone not knowing how to present themselves and not getting the opportunity to either. And the one chance it seemed like they did, it was taken from them by circumstance. So yeah, it actually retroactively makes that death good in like a narrative sense. It matters most in terms of, I think, identity expression. So Sam is viewed as a man, right? And because he does things like be strong and kill people, people assume he's a man, which, as we all know, only men can do those things. Especially in anime, where you're in a mech suit. It's speaking to gendered expectations. It's at least gesturing at them. I'm not going to say it's like some seminal feminist woke fest. It's not, but it's gesturing at those ideas of how we default, right, to whatever. We go big strong equals man, mechanical thing equals man, and that's not necessarily true, is it? This relates to Firefly's subtextual arc, which is about her realizing that her identity as a woman can be recognized and won't just be subsumed or hidden by the existence of Sam. She realizes this partly because of how freeing the dreamscape has been, and because the Trailblazer recognizes her as both a woman and for her various noble deeds across the Pinocchio quests. This explains why she was willing to go through pain worse than death to enter the dreamscape in the first place. And it's also why, at the end of the Pinocchio quest, Firefly goes to see Jade and tries to bargain for a cure to ELS. It also kind of makes the story somewhat circular, as it's kind of just a reaffirmation of Firefly's ability to fight, to express herself, and to live. Of course, there's a juxtaposition here in her character as she follows Elio's script in the hopes that ELS will be cured, restricting her autonomy even further. Even though obviously her disease does limit her choices quite a lot anyway. It kind of forces her to restrict herself to the Sam suit so she won't die, and that forces her into extreme pain and an identity she's not comfortable with. And whilst none of these underlying problems are truly addressed in the Pinocchio quest, she kind of gets what she wanted most anyway, that recognition of her true self, because she was able to express herself to the Trailblazer, and they will remember her as she wants to be. After this experience, her biggest fear, that loss of her true self, just isn't really possible anymore because of that. This is why I think the quest ends with her having a less dysphoric, for lack of a better word, relationship with Sam. She still needs the mech, maybe even wants it in some ways, but she's no longer just perceived as this masculine destructive force or criminal, as previously represented by Elio's script's demands and just how Sam was seen to the broader universe, right? She was able to just kind of be an average person for a while, and is sort of a hero too due to her actions on the Radiant Feldspar and in other parts of the Pinocchio quest. And that's just an identity she's more comfortable with. So in a way, her identity, it doesn't just get recognised by Trailblazer, it's also recognised by others, and it kind of becomes more complete, or how she would, how more she would want it to be, more how she would want it to be. And I hope that as her story continues in future installments of it, that she gets to keep experiencing that. The woke section. Well, that's the whole video, but I thought it would be funny to title something the woke section. And this idea of Firefly being able to suppress her identity being forced to suppress her identity to save her own life, I think unsurprisingly, resonates with a lot of trans people, and I would go as far as to say that I think it's a metaphor for being trans, right? I'm not a trans person, so I'm not going to speak to that insanely loads, but I will go into ways where it will, suggest it's a metaphor for it in the future of the video. But since so many, trans people, or just people in general, they can't live as the gender they choose, right? Or feel most represented by, whatever, right? So, because they might be harassed or harmed, or harmed, or disowned, on a personal level, right? And in most countries, being trans in public life is an area where you can be discriminated against because of that, or it's a crime. So it's kind of a brave thing to put in your game, just even implicitly. The whole gender dynamic of Sam, E versus Firefly, G, and one being her kind of preferred choice, where she wants to present herself at least more one way than the other, than the way she's being forced to. It's kind of pretty clear. That's what that's getting at. And considering how rough things are for people who are trans, even in woke Western countries like mine, it's, I think, really important to emphasize that this stuff matters, representation matters, and we should care. It's kind of funny because if I had a nickel for every time an anime character I like could kind of roughly be interpreted as a metaphor for trans issues or identity issues, I'd have 3 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's pretty odd for this guy. Just need further introspection. Probably not. Another group who this represents is the disabled, as unfortunately, regardless of what they want, they'll often be defined by their disability by people who don't get it and don't understand it and don't understand what they need, and that's horrible. And just and it's much like how the rest of the Honkai Star Rail universe doesn't understand Firefly as a person. They who's trapped essentially inside Sam to stay alive. They they see the disability first, essentially, which is the suit, right? The kind of proverbial wheelchair in this instance mirrors the experience of some disabled people who they might have to rely on something they hate just to live, be that a wheelchair or something else. And Firefly really echoes that situation of just not being able to function like everyone else, which is something many neurodivergent people also experience. And to just go back to that trans metaphor, there is more to it, and one of the things that I think really nails this down for me as well is even actually functions as a combat unit, reflects an interpretation of her as a sort of trans character. She starts combat as just Sam, and isn't as effective as her later form is, right? It's and it damages herself, right, when she attacks. And then she goes through this magical girl transition, it's Sailor Moon or something, I don't know, I haven't seen it. But then the character model is infused with green, which I have some more theories of video about, the color relation in a sequel video. But it's, in short, it's just a representation of her spirit versus the fiery red of the Sam suit. And then when she starts attacking, she starts healing instead of taking damage. I just realised the healing thing, by the way, and that's kind of crazy. So I think you can kind of fairly make the case that, she starts out fighting the fight presenting as a man, and she's weaker because of it, and then solely relying on that strength. But when she ults, she embraces herself as a woman, and then does big PP super break damage, she just becomes a really strong character after that, right? Really cool representative ambient storytelling, if you'll allow me to pretend I know what that word means, even though it appeared in my script. what those words mean. And it's just kind of a great encapsulation of this aspect of her character. And the nature of that transition from mech to magical girl, mecha hybrid, could, also have a bit of a different meaning than I've said, I think. I think you could interpret it in a couple of different ways, and this is another one, right? So the shift from red to green could also be meant to represent her own power, or her true self coming out. And then
it could be read as a kind of synthesis, right, between Sam's power and Firefly's, and that could imply a middle ground between the two from an identity perspective, like a non-binary person, right? I'm not so sure that that's the case, but there is some evidence, like in that quote from earlier, she says, "But I hope it isn't all of me." And I think that you could read that as she wants to express herself, more in separation from Sam, but at the same time, sees the value of Sam in the rest of the quote and relates to that a lot. So it's not necessary. You could see it that way, is what I'm saying. I'm not sure I agree with that. I kind of think that it's someone going, "This is what I was created for, but I want to escape it." But I could also see someone saying, "Well, maybe not." And it's actually about her wanting a better relationship with that aspect of herself, right? But as I said, I don't think I agree with that. But I did want to say that, this kind of viewing Firefly as a trans character isn't necessarily as clear cut, right? It could be a lot of different types of things that it's gesturing at, and if that helps you or whatever, if that kind of analysis is more close to whatever your experience might be, if you have one, then I see no reason not to interpret it like that. And another fun, interpreting, meaning from combat, even though this is definitely not something to take that much meaning from, is that Firefly and Imaginary Trailblazer work pretty well together, which it doesn't mean anything, as they were saying, but it's kind of cute, right? The Blazerfly section. Now we're on to the real good stuff. The point of Firefly's character of just not being able to live as she chooses makes the connection she has with Trailblazer a lot more impactful and closer in space, since Firefly is the one making the choices. She's kind of leading the scenes. And this makes sense because Trailblazer as a character doesn't remember Firefly. Firefly remembers Trailblazer. Firefly knows the relationship they once had. And she's got a chance to make a first impression again, and she's going to take it. And she's going to do stuff. And show them things. And show them the fun time they've had in Pinocchio. And I think that's really sweet. And it gets in the way of this idea of it being this wish fulfillment, self-insert thing. And, you just have to look a bit below the surface and all of a sudden it's not what you thought it was. And, since the audience isn't really making the decisions, it kind of explains why I think a lot of people dislike and get annoyed at these scenes, because they aren't making the choices in a broad sense. It's it does prevent this unhealthy attachment to a protagonist, I think, of viewing yourself as them most of the time is an unhealthy thing to do, I would say. And, I like protagonists that have some personality, as I feel that Trailblazer does, and I think it does a great job of setting that jovial tone that I talk about, and that silly tone, and I really like that about Honkai Star Rail. It's, I think, how it's able to kind of successfully deal with difficult themes. And it's part of the reason why I'm excited to see this backstory fleshed out. Because not only will it make the dynamics of the Firefly Trailblazer ship really cool, potentially, or, really, there's loads of directions you could take it, right? And that's all interesting, but the cooler thing is it's informing Trailblazer's characterization. You get to see the person they were and that they are now
maybe once upon a time they were not so silly, but we shall see. And in fairness to other people who might disagree with me, I can see someone saying, well, Firefly is kind of just fawning over the Trailblazer, who is this avatar of the player. So isn't that like all of these other anime characters, right, that fawn over the main character, who is clearly meant to be like an insert from the audience? And unlike these characters, I would say, is Firefly doesn't treat Trailblazer like they're the center of the universe, and the Trailblazer also offers Firefly stuff, like as like a potential interest, which I'll get into in a bit. She just kind of spends time with them, and reignites the friendship that they once had, or whatever else they might have once had or not had, right? We don't know. Which I think adds into this element of realness to it. It's a person getting another chance to make a first impression, and of course they're gonna like kind of go all out for it if they cared about that person to any extent. I think fits with this being a kind of fleeting experience as well for Firefly, because it's one of the few times she gets to kind of exercise her choices and what she wants to do. So it's more about her than it is the player or the Trailblazer. It forces the player to look at the world of the game and treat Firefly as a person within that world with their wants and their desires, and actually engage with them as a character rather than just as set dressing as an object, right? It's much more deep, I guess, simply put. Speaking of making Firefly more than set dressing, Radiant Feldspar, but when it appears that she's going to heroically sacrifice herself, the bomb is just fireworks, and instead she shares a bridal carry amidst fireworks with Trailblazer. It's amazing and really romantic, in implication at least, and both times her narrative is making a clear statement that it's not her strength as Sam that defines her, or her weakness as her physical form of Firefly that defines her. It's choices. It's even in her limited situation, it's what she's choosing to do. And in a way, this whole thing functions as a microcosm of perhaps a broader story we'll see, where we've got her attempting to present herself as an individual, and then in the kind of next chapter she's presenting herself as Sam because she has to survive, and then in the third chapter she gets to once again, but with more freedom, present herself how she chooses. And it's that brief moment amongst the fireworks that you kind of see that happen, and maybe that's a hint of what's going to happen in the future. And I think that's really powerful and really hopeful and really joyous in a story that is about death. Is that not powerful? Even in the story where she suffers 3 deaths, it's about her living more than she ever has. That's cool as shit. And her connection with the Trailblazer strengthens all of that, because of it's about her decisions. And Trailblazer acts as this place or person where she's able to be her true self around them, just because of circumstance, right? And potentially because of that past we don't know about, that she's able to be her true self around Trailblazer. And that's like, why wouldn't she like Trailblazer or love Trailblazer or whatever? Because I would if I was her. They're actively facilitating her happiness. And from someone in that situation, I don't think you can expect anything else. And I think that makes it all really make sense, and makes the ship really nice, and it's just kind of wholesome, I guess. And speaking of that fireworks scene, I do think it's quite nice that she tries to save everyone, and obviously Trailblazer, and is risking her life for Trailblazer, which is kind of romantic in and of itself. It's kind of that romantic trope, right? I feel like there's a trope there about that. where the hero saves their love interest. But ironically, again, we're in the passive role through observing through the Trailblazer. So again, it's that whole thing, right, of we're kind of not the hero of that particular story. And, it also kind of does show that she never feared death, because she's just like, yeah, I'm just going to take this bomb. And I think it's a fun side note to all of this that isn't really related directly to the story, that if you think about the ship between Trailblazer and Firefly, like in a holistic sense, the kind of sexuality of it, as in like gay, straight, bi, right? None of them really cover it, because of all of this gender stuff with Sam and Firefly makes it mean that arguably she's both a man and a woman, depending on circumstance, right? Like, obviously I would say she's a woman, but it's kind of arguable, right? And in terms of presentation, you can argue that Sam is a man based off how everyone addresses Sam, right? And Trailblazer, because of player choice, is either a man or a woman. And you could argue that's just showing like bisexuality or whatever. But if we look a bit broader than that, outwards, it's more that, like, depending on what we choose, these characters are different but still the same. So it's kind of like saying that being straight or gay or bi or whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's just like about being your true self, which is cute and nice. And I don't know, I feel like it just really resonates with me on a personal level, that it just doesn't really matter all that much. You love what you love, and that's cool. As long as you're not hurting anybody. Obviously. And I think just to finish off this little section, I'm going to make some points about imagery. The romantic kind of gender role undermining imagery of their bridal carry, and the contrast between the situations with the memory zone mean and the bomb. And then there's the whole your name is in the movie style imagery with the comets above her hideout in Pinacoli and that whole section. And the kind of also the song from Robin that's kind of about Firefly. And of course the Trailblazer and Firefly holding each other in the fireworks, and that very kind of meaningful connection that they make, not just emotionally but physically. And all of which just makes for not just interesting imagery, but very clearly, really, like romantic imagery, even if it's just technically implied. And not only that, but these characters end up defying typical gender expression and are ultimately a rejection of a trope-driven, simplistic fiction, right? They're complicated. Even Trailblazer to some extent, but certainly Firefly. And even if that romantic tension, as I said, is just implied, it's that feeling from this imagery that makes it more than that to a lot of people. And I think to myself, too. It makes it pop. It makes it feel very real. And it makes me kind of understand it on a fundamental level. And I just love that. I think it's so sweet. Community reaction and, well, what comes next? I'm not really sure how to approach this section. I previously had a whole thing about how calling Firefly waifu bait was reductive and kind of misogynistic. But in a broader sense, I kind of think there's a point there. Not about Firefly specifically, but about the genre in general, and of the genre of gacha, if you can call it such a thing. And I would say that it kind of just inherently exploits lonely, poorly socialized, and sometimes bigoted people into spending money that, is very similar to gambling. And all through having characters that, and let's be honest here, are mostly women, attempting to appeal to you in the most marketable ways that they can. And I've seen so many people
respond negatively about Firefly because of these broad, all-encompassing points about gacha and anime characters. But it's rarely about any of the other characters in the game that you could make that point about. I understand it's partly due to the kind of uniqueness of that connection that I did just describe between Trailblazer and Firefly, but it's not like you can't make that point about, say, Kafka, even if it's a bit weird. And yeah, Firefly has more like promotional stuff and story involvement, but that is because she's emblematic of this story of fighting against death and the despair it brings on a much more fundamental level than a lot of those other characters are. Firefly is a representation of individuality, of humanity persisting, even though it might wholly disappear in a person and make them no longer exist. It's a metaphor for the disappearance of humanity, and this makes her role in the narrative about stories of death and how to cope with it on the same level of like narrative and thematic importance as Aeons and entire planets like Belobog. No wonder she has loads of Hoyo propaganda to back her up. It's like Finon. Finon's the same because he also represents these same themes. More pressingly, the narrative that she presents is actually that she's a part of, right, is amazing. And Trailblazer and Firefly's connection adds to it because they are representing the joy and whimsy, the brief moments of it that exist in her life in the face of literally dying. It's peak romance to me, and I understand the fear of self-inserting and people self-inserting onto Trailblazer, but it's not like they do that with just Firefly. It's not like that's not common in the community with a bunch of characters. And I would personally rather they self-insert onto something with depth and positive messages, and just like that are just like accepting people for who they are, rather than similar dynamics that have minimal meaning, like beyond just like reaffirmation of how they might view women or men. Firefly's narrative challenges those things. It's not just like feeding them. Personally, I hope that Hoyo just fully commit and like make them kiss or something, because the implicit feelings between Firefly and Trailblazer are the same feelings the Astral Express brings about. It's just wherever they go, they bring the joy and whimsy back, right? Will this happen? No, probably not. Mainly because I think people would be very upset about it, and also it wouldn't make money as much as they'd be able to make in other ways, which does suck. But that's the art of shipping two characters together. It's a path to pain and permanently suffering, as they never ever get to be the canon ship, and when they do, they make it suck. One day, it might be the canon ship and not suck for me, but I'm betting it won't be these two, because the incentive's just not there for it. The incentive is generate new, non-romantic romantic interests in infinitely inferior forms because of Firefly's intrinsic link to, that theme of death and how to deal with it. And of course, to Trailblazer's past, it's kind of impossible for them to ever top that dynamic for a romantic interest for the Trailblazer, at least. And that doesn't mean those stories will always be bad, but it does, mean that this is the best one they're going to pump out for this dynamic. So maybe they won't ever try to do the non-romantic romantic interest thing. You could argue they already have, but I don't know. I don't really think so, and I feel like they're going to struggle to ever top that dynamic, so maybe they won't do that. But I do feel like the incentive is there for them to do that. And look, this is just to finish everything off here. It's fine if you dislike the ship or Firefly. I don't want to be the source of Twitter discourse, man. Especially since it's toxic and evil now. I think the best way to just finish this off is just to say this whole thing's got a little insane, to the extent that people never want Firefly to be like meta in the combat of the game again, because they just hate her character for potentially the reasons I've listed, or others, I don't know. I'm not them. I just wanted to highlight the value of her character on an artistic level, and the ship as well, and how that's cool and interesting and not bad, actually. And at the end of the day, why should you let other people's opinions, or even worse, vibes, dictate your own? I think we should just all try to look outside of this kind of semi-factional nonsense surrounding this character. And don't get me wrong, if what I've said about Firefly and Firefly Trailblazer has changed your mind, then I'm glad. That's what I wanted, after all. It's more because I'm just against the overwhelming negativity surrounding her character. Because I just think that everything turns sour now, and this is just one of those examples where it just doesn't need to be. Which I know that's probably the attitude I've brought to this last section, right? I'm not exempt from that. I've probably brought everything down by bringing lots of this stuff up. But it's just so much of the world is just exploitation, and the accusation that Firefly is leaning into a bunch of bad things, and and the driver is money, and it's yeah, of course. That's a thing to some extent, right? But should we just let ourselves become so jaded that we don't appreciate when things are done well? If you look at what I think about Firefly, right? She's a metaphor for trans and disability acceptance. And, because Firefly struggles with identity and her coming to grips with what it means to be a human with a life worthy of autonomy, and, all of that, just all lose its meaning. Simply because the circumstances of its creation were, part of a world where money and capital is the driving force, but art and potentially some other bad things too. I don't think so, especially when the story is so against presenting simplistic gender narratives, right? And it's so kind of outwardly progressive for what it is. If anything, if we live in a world where that is the case, we should value the meanings behind art, especially behind the art produced under such duress, more, not less. Obviously not in a monetary way, but in a value way. That's more valuable as the world becomes increasingly commercial and, well, there's less art. And highlighting the kind of subtextual meanings of stories like Fireflies is just, it's fighting for every crumb of joy in the world, and, in a world that's just suffering, and in a universe that's suffering from inevitable moral cynicism and physical decay, all the while just it's being choked by corporate greed and money. And it's not an accident, I think, that obviously is about Earth and our universe and reality, but also it's the case in Honkai Star Rail's universe too. But there's still joy and whimsy. There's still things like Firefly. We're still here, and we're not truly dead as a species, as people with artistic merit, until the last story is written and we can understand it. The video, by the way, just to let you know, this will have a sequel surrounding the animated short Embers of Glamoth and how it links to her humanity, which it isn't finished yet, but when I've finished the video and it's published, it'll be finished, so yippee. and for whenever that is, probably in 2 billion years, and the dinosaurs will be back or something. I don't know. The dinosaurs aren't coming back. But so subscribe and like the video for that, I guess. Oh, yeah, I do have something to show everybody. Yeah, so my girlfriend made this, and it's really cool, and I wanted to show everybody because my girlfriend's great, and also Firefly's cool. So, yeah. Also, I bought this. It's really cute. There's not a Firefly one, unfortunately, but there is a Kafka one. She's on a little train car, but they don't stick together. Like she's dead now. Why don't they have like a magnet on this, and so they could link together, so you could fiddle around with it, and then you could make like a whole train of them because you can get like a whole train of them. Why they don't have that? I don't know. Thank you for looking at my consumerist slop and also my wonderful piece of art, which I think is a wonderful metaphor for how I've talked about Honkai Star Rail in this video. Actually, so have a good one.